So we have another session that we're going to deal with, and we try to do it in the middle of the two board sessions, a joint session where we just talk a little bit about coordination. We don't often have a joint session. You do sit into each other's sessions from time to time, but we don't often have a joint session between the two boards, and we probably in future will have to do this, not will have to, but would like to do this more regularly, because it becomes so clear to us as we also look at your strategies and work plans that the continuous need for collaboration is just so important. We're now going into both of the boards working on technology and even with the PI project and so on, and there's just so many things where these two are almost two sides of a coin, the code on the one hand and the ISAs on the other. So it's nice to have the larger group of standard setting board leadership in the room. We're going to focus specifically in this session today, just because it's imminent to get the standards out on the coordination between the two boards when it comes to sustainability. And you've touched on it a little bit, and you've done a lot of work on it, but let's maybe just specifically focus on that as we talk about it. Just give me a second, I just need to get to my pages in my book. Okay. We have a set of slides from you. Am I going to Tom, Gabriella, or James on that? Gabriella. Okay. You've got the floor, Gabriella. You might as well continue. And your picture is at the top, so I'll start with you.
Okay, that's a criteria. Okay, I'm going to be very quick. I think that this board, I'm not going the first slide on coordination speaks by itself. I'm not going to read it. What I have to say is that there is a project, if I may say so, a plan in place to make sure that on sustainability over the next few months and over the last few months, we do what we need to do to make sure that we respond to the call for consistency, interoperability, and ability of providing the users of the standards with the necessary understandability without having gaps, contradictions, etc. So both boards are working, both staffs are working hectically to identify the topics that deserve this merit and need this exercise of coordination. Even if, again, we can't say at this point in time that everything has been identified. We are relatively or very much confident that we have identified the most relevant topics. And as the next slides say, and I think that we will not go into the details of the different, the status of the coordination on the different topics, but I think they speak by themselves by the level of achievement and success on the different topics. There are still some issues to be dealt with. How we are doing this? Well, you don't need to know all our housekeeping, but staffs are working together. No, I don't know if not on a daily basis, but intensively. Chairs are speaking, task forces members are speaking as well. The boards had a joint session in June to try to understand how to what the topics, the approach to the topics, and how to address this. So all in all, both boards are committed to support adoption and implementation in the future as well. There are some perceived differences, and some differences actually, but we are optimistic that in some time now we will have a very stable basis of coordinated topics, and that we will have eliminated the reasons for some concerns from our stakeholders, namely from the PIOB. So I think that for this slide, it's what I can say, but I think more than the slide, it's this idea of reassuring the PIOB that we are doing what we need to do. It's working, it's advancing, it's being successful, Well, it's taking a lot of work and a lot of time. It's true. To the staffs, and there are some still some risks. First, because we haven't finished analyzing the responses and what the responses means in terms of what we need to do in our standards, because there are time differences, etc. But I think that this will be smoothened by the high level of coordination on the identified topics that we already managed to identify and to address successfully. Tom.
I don't want to repeat too much, but I think it's important to hear from both boards itself. So I think more than anything else, there's a sense of optimism I want to give this group and others who are following, that we are 100% committed to have complementary, totally converged standards to the fullest extent possible. I think the deck will show you that, in principle, most of the big issues have been addressed, not to say all of them have yet. But we know, and what we've talked about at our board, is that complementarity and interoperability is a public interest issue. And when we close these issues off at our board, we're not going to reopen them at our board going forward unless there's some unintended consequence of whatever decision we've taken that has an impact down the road. So, like, we will agree, and Mark observed our meeting, and I had a discussion with our board, and our board totally agreed. It's like, if there's an agreement that works, and for both standards, even if someone has a slight different preference, we're past the point of preference right now. Like, we want to make sure that the standards work together and we come up with a high quality solution. And I believe in many areas we're already there. And so I also think we've built in circuit breakers in the system, whether it's the coordination meeting next week or task force meeting afterwards. Our board actually meets in July. We have an opportunity for joint sessions in September, and that's under discussion in New York, because both boards are meeting simultaneously in New York City. So that could occur before we reach final approval. Like, I'm not saying that there's not risk. They're two independent boards, but with slightly different timings and processes. But I really want to give a sense, like, yeah, that is true. But I lived through a much harder convergence process a couple decades ago, and these boards are really working well together. And so there'll be a lot of work. The thing about risk management is that the risks exist. The problem is if you don't mitigate them, you're never going to get the total risk, even in a reasonable assurance engagement, down to zero. But we're going to bring it to an acceptably low level, not to use the lingo too much. So we won't go through every slide, but as you can see, in many instances, if you go to the following pages, it's like they're being addressed with discrete wording, and there's, as we speak, almost in real time, things have been going back and forth. The one area, and this will go probably into my discussion, that's the most challenging, and it's most challenging technically, relates to the whole area of groups and value chains and other practitioners as well. Because there's a question about direction, supervision, or review by the group assurance leader, the use of the work of another practitioner, if it's assurance work or non-assurance work. What's the implications for that in terms of the technical requirements for independence versus objectivity in the code? So this is the area that I would say within our board we're working hardest on, because obviously we're engaged with the IESBA C1 also reminded us of some issues that they had raised. Our board members have raised it at our tech commission, and it does have cross-cutting impact. So I think that's the one we'll probably need to work hardest on. But I will reiterate that both of us are committed to the objective. The will is there. We have opportunities for change. I'm not saying that there's no risk possible, but we're doing this, remember, because there are opportunities as well. And so I'm hopeful that by September, we will have fully converged approaches or complementary approaches or interoperability. You know, there may be specificities in both standards that have to go beyond the core agreement too. So, because we have standards that apply for different things. I'll stop there and give us time for any questions or responses.
Thank you very much. And maybe, Gabriella, if we put it on that green slide, I'm just going to wait for comments and questions. Maybe just a couple of comments from our side. And you obviously know, and I've made the comment in the introduction, Gabriella, as well, and you've certainly both seen it in the comment letters and views from some of the larger regulators and so on, that it is really critically important that these items on this list are cleared out sufficiently in a new standard like this, or two sets of new standards like this, and very uncharted waters for assurance providers and preparers. The worst thing you can do is create confusion with little tweaks in the manner in which one and the other set of standards are doing things. So it is absolutely important. Looking at that list, I just thought, firstly, it's really useful for us to see that, because we have at a previous meeting said to ourselves, you know, we know that definitions, terminology is an issue, and we sort of pick up on things, but there's a very specific list. Work plan, Mark is very big on work plans and action lists and timelines, so it's very clear what needs to be done. Looking at it, it seems as if many of those are 80%, maybe that's an overstatement, but many of those topics you've clearly spoken quite a lot about. I saw in our observation memo and in your report, Tom, the work that you've done on clarifying between component and component practitioner, another practitioner, all of those things. So the alignment is very important. Just going to September, it seems, Gabriella, as if by that time your board would have finalized analyzing the comment letters, and hopefully by September bed down these things, because it's going to be quite problematic if there are little tweaks, and if there's a constant moving of definitions in terms. I think that's going to make it not just confusing for people ultimately using the standard, but it's going to make it very difficult to get a set of standards out there, and for the PIB to navigate how do we actually certify two sets of standards with different definitions, different ways of approaching these common themes. So very important that you work together. We're very comfortable with the feedback that you've given us, that it's something that's getting focus and priority, not just at the staff level, but between the two of you as well. So we would just really, really encourage you, for the sake of getting this out, and getting this out in a time frame that actually supports the European adoption of especially of the assurance standard, because that's where their line is at the moment, that we all work together to get this right. Mark.
Yeah, just actually to sort of pick up really, Linda, on some of your comments there. So I absolutely get the commitment to reach a coordinated standard, and Tom, we discussed this at some length, and I took you to task, or your board to task, in the observation of the last meeting on this point. My concern is that the two boards are on parallel tracks, but obviously the IAASB is further down the line than IESBA, and the concern to me is that you'll do a lot of work in the run-up to September, when the IAASB will approve its standard. And I'm concerned that differences, either of definition or perhaps interpretation of definitions, might creep in that 3 months between IAASB finalising the standard and IESBA finalising its standard. And I would seek an undertaking from IESBA that once these areas of coordination have been agreed in order to enable IAASB to finalise its standard in September, that IESBA will put pen down on those issues and will not reopen them and not revisit them. I think that's very important, because if you as Linda said, if you get little differences or nuances of interpretation on these fairly key definitions, it undermines public trust, frankly, in the standards. So that's my comment, and I wonder whether IESBA could commit to that kind of pens down approach in September.
And I would say, subject to the unlikely event or the black swan issue that pops out in the final analysis. Can I take more questions, and then we sort of decide which ones we direct to you and which ones to Tom? Tom, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask this a little bit related question. I understand that for IAASB, you will finalize and give approval to the 5,000, and IESBA is the first time for discussing the how to address the comments. So it means that, but at the same time, the schedule is on the same week, on September. It means that what happens if some of the issue, related issue will arise as Mark suggested from the IESBA board meeting, which might have an impact on the IAASB. Do you have any specific, how can I say, how to address that sort of for the procedure purpose? And the another is that just a comment is that I'm very happy to see that the coordination level is very, very high, especially as for the definition, you will start the identical position. And the one point I would like to emphasize is that perhaps you will use the word a certain definition, and then you will add some of the phrases like for the purpose of 5,000 or for the purpose of IESA, it means something or something. So the risk might be okay to link, giving the bridge of the definition and the other articles, but it may have some sort of impact of the interpretation of the definition itself. So please pay attention to that sort of the risk, because for example, in football in the United States means a totally different thing from the football in Europe. So the same word doesn't mean the same thing for the purpose of 5,000 or for the purpose of IESA. They might have different meanings. Thank you.
That's a good sports analogy, and there might be benefit in having it in the same week to solve it. I'm going to take all the questions, and then I'm going to go back to the two of you. Boganya?
Thank you, Linda. Football idea was a good idea, Tom. It's worrying that this might happen, but I understand that all the things you are doing about the coordination is going to avoid this type of confusion. But I'm still a bit concerned about some details. For instance, in these slides, not in this one, but in the following one or the following one, next one, yeah, here. Well, when I read the first boxes, then IESBA has additional definitions to fit their needs, and then group sustainability insurance client and group sustainability assurance firm. So when I read this, I said, why does IESBA might have different needs? I don't understand it. I'm thinking that this has to be applied and used by others, which is not us, it's for people with less knowledge, perhaps. Then also, in the second box, again, IESBA and IAASB approach regarding definitions, aligning, not precluding additional definitions to fit each board's needs, e.g. component firms. So when I read this, I get confused and concerned. So if you agree with the fundamentals, but you leave some room for, solving your peculiar needs, at the end, we might have the problem that Mark was commenting. I mean, one standard is going to be finalized by September, the other by December. So is there could it be any final unintended difference between the two interpretations? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think you've heard that there's certainly concern about the risk because of the timing of the two standards, that there could be differences. And first, let me just applaud you on the efforts of both the boards and everyone else working with you to work together to identify and resolve those differences as soon as possible. I have, again, not a suggestion, not a question, but more a practical suggestion that that this collaboration or coordination process shouldn't end when IESBA finalizes their standard in September, but should continue until, I've said it backwards. Let me start over if we can cut that from the videotape. It shouldn't end when the IAASB approves their standard in September, but should continue until IESBA has approved their standard. It seems to me the value in that, there may be little, if anything, to discuss in that period, but there is a risk, and we want to manage the risk. We can't, as Tom pointed out, although these are my words, not Tom's, we can't eliminate that risk. The risk exists. But we can manage that risk, and we can also report back at the time of the finalization of the IESBA standard, whether or not through that period where we had that risk, that timing, whether or not anything arose that might be of concern. So I would just suggest that coordination work doesn't end in September when the IAASB standard is finalized.
Thank you. Tom, Gabrielle, I'll go to you first and then to Tom. And I don't think you necessarily have to go into the specific individual items, but maybe just if you want to elaborate a little bit on, the questions asked and specifically your assessment of the risk, the question that Mark asked, and then I'll go to Tom. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. To Mark's question on the risk. I think it's evident that some risk exists. And we cannot eliminate. This was said by everybody, and this is for some reasons, and the main reason is that there is a due process. So we can't finalize what is not final. We can do what we can, the most that we can. It's what we are doing. But all this exercise, which of course is taking a lot of effort, time, etc. We can make a best effort commitment. We can't make a results commitment. And this is because the due process says that the process will be over in December and not in September. And this is something that, well, I'd like to understand how the PIOB sees this, but I don't think that we can do much about this. I can't say, my board, it's over. Mostly if there is anything that comes after and that we don't know. I think that this risk is very, very low. This risk will be very low, but we can't eliminate it, and I think it's important to have that in mind. So putting the pen down in September, hopefully we will be able to do it, and we will not need to take the pen again if something comes, something appears. That's what we are working hectically over the summer to achieve, but I can't assume, or we can't assume more than a best effort, big effort, huge effort commitment. That's what we are doing. Low risk, very low risk, but it's important that, in face of these considerations, that we don't pretend that the risk exists. And I don't see, anyway, any possibility of eliminating the risk unless we would finalize the standards in September as well. But we never, ever said that we could do this, that we could anticipate our schedule. So this is one of the things. Secondly, I think that we, as Linda, you mentioned with respect to other moments of this meeting, we should ask about the public interest the underlying public interest to everything that we are doing. And of course, the underlying public interest is that this coordination is important. It's important that stakeholders are not lost into the weeds of different definitions, different approaches, inconsistent. For me, much more than the definitions, it's possible inconsistencies, material inconsistencies that can arise, unintended consequences from different terminology, etc. And we are all very well aware that this is what we have to do, this is what we must do, and that we have to come up with the best possible product for our stakeholders, no matter what it takes for the two boards, the teams, etc. This is what we need to do for the public interest. But it's not but, and we are doing that. This is what we are aiming at, but still the time difference takes some risks. And the objective of adoption by the European Commission is, an important objective, and we are aware of that. The timeline is something that we need to take into consideration, and for sure it is, but it will also create the risk of some frameworks advance without any ethical considerations, because the IESBA is not going to be ready. So, again, I'm reaffirming my commitment and the commitment of our board and the commitment of our staff, which I think is evident in what we are seeing here, in a moment where we are also analyzing the 93 responses and etc. There is no doubt that we are committed to this public interest objective, but I think it's also my duty to say, okay, the risk will be very, very, very low. I'm almost sure that there won't be any issues between September and December, and that we will be able to have a significant level of agreement and confidence that these issues will not be reopened. If there is any issue that arises after, then we will see how to deal. Materially, substantially, I think the risk is very, very low. Formally, we still have a process running until December, and we can finalize it before it's final.
Thanks. Thanks, Gabriela. Tom?
So a couple of things that I should respond to here. Again, I want to just reiterate some of the points that Gabriela said. We obviously, if something is wrong with our standard, no matter what point in our life of the standard setting process, we will address it. And also remember that our standard will be approved in September, but won't be submitted. We have things to do to submit for certification probably, which would probably be much more like November, December-ish, because we have all the materials. Now, a few other things. So Tom, you mentioned that the two boards are meeting in September, and it will be the first time. Actually, I personally believe, we have our technical directors, we're still working through some of the logistics of that meeting. If an issue came up that we think we have resolved and somehow is not resolved because of unintended consequences, our being in New York together could provide an opportunity for us jointly to handle it. Or we could be fine and both take a public demonstration of support that we believe we're fine. We haven't worked through all of those details, so I don't want to make promises yet on those things, but I think that's the case. You pointed also, there's things that our standards do or things that Gabriela's standards do. We will have bridges, and that's what we're working in our standards, like things for people to leap off on. And that doesn't just apply to our standard, it applies to different jurisdictions adopting double materiality approaches if they need to expand upon it. Now we're putting a little bit of a hook in the standard itself. Begonia, you talk about this point, and maybe the problem is we're using slides with just bullet points, but we're talking about group sustainability assurance client and group sustainability assurance firm. Just to point out, these types of differences actually exist on the audit side already. We'll take an example here. On the group side, and Ken probably could interject more, and I really, that they need not only engagement level definitions, but firm level definitions for their independence requirements to work, and they also need client definitions. Like, just on the audit side, if you're a preparer and a professional accountant, you're subject to the code. But if you're also the auditor, you're subject to the code, and it could work in different ways. And obviously, this is a slightly different environment because we have non-professional accountants involved. So that's, like, the core will be the same. It's just a question of amplification for the purposes of the code in the instance of sustainability. Like, I don't think that will cause confusion. We have to be careful. Like, there is a question, as I go back to the most challenging issue we're dealing with, which is about assurance work and work, which is related to the group assurance requirement. We're working through these issues, but I'm hopeful that it will all make sense, that it will recognize that the code applies to a broader universe than just the assurance practitioner, and that's why you may have different things in each, and that's why we have to be especially attentive to the hooks we provide in a standard, so they are interoperable. James, did you want to come into this on that point? The other thing is, Dave, your point about coordination not ending. Yeah, obviously, I think that's the case. We're going to have to do a lot of additional work, one, to prepare the package for certification, not the least. So we need to make sure that what's in our bases, et cetera, are the same. But we're also going to be working on, as you know, which is in my report to you, significant first-time application material that is going to come out simultaneously with certification and publication. And so there probably will be cross-cutting issues there. Then IESBA is going to probably have application material, and we're going to have further application material. I envision a long-term coordination of these things. Plus, as their standards get rolled out, there's an opportunity under the IFIA umbrella for cooperation. People are just so focused on getting the standards done, and this coordination matters, which is consuming a lot of time, that we haven't fully worked through all those forward-looking issues. But it seems to me axiomatic almost in the way that we're working. James, did you want to come in on the points about the differences?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, as we move, I guess in tandem to the finalizations of the standards, two things that I share just as an observation. We all have history for the last 15 years with groups and values. It is a sophisticated area and wrought by differing challenges and different circumstances and arrangements. So we know groups, even in the audit space, is complex. It has become increasingly complex here. I see input from groups such as IOSCO and others, and I think the message here in this space is to remain very, very clear about the principle to which you want to communicate through your requirements. And I think to come to a necessary degree of precision so that they understand what the standard is addressing. And I perhaps just leave, and this is, to me, is the biggest risk of coordination when we finalize things, is dealing with last minute, very specific, unique case type examples. And then trying to respond to that through requirements. And that is where things start unwinding. And I think as we allow this inaugural set of standards to come out, specific scenarios, cases, etc., where we're trying to start changing things to address one or two specific scenarios, there's 1,000. That creates a risk of coordination. It creates a potential for inconsistency. I think that maybe as a public interest point to consider, it's okay for the board, for the standards to remain silent on some of those issues at this stage. And it's just a principle I think may come to be relevant as we try and finalize it in the final stages. And then the final stages are always very intense.
Thanks,
Thank you.
thanks, James. And there's certainly lots of experience within the boards and within the staff teams. So maybe just in concluding on the session, thank you. Thank you. It was really worthwhile having the conversation. It was worthwhile understanding the level of detail and coordination and attention. The thought that in my mind is just, it's clearly going to be a very hard and a busy next 3 months and 6 months. It's really important that there's a lot of discipline, which James just referred to in that little final stretch of the race, and the mindset of both boards that once you've had a debate and agreed on something, that those will only be opened up in the instance of new information. We're always very tempted, as James was sort of referring to go back and tweak and change and improve a little bit. But I think that it's going to take quite a lot of leadership from both of you, and probably specifically you, Gabriella, and that last stretch to get your board to continue with the discipline and the mindset to say, well, if these have been debated and agreed, we're not going to open it up in the absence of new information, a new issue that's come about, or something like that. We, Tom had a comment about football, and I was just thinking about this potential concern that people see in the difference of the timelines. I don't think there's necessarily a problem in the fact that there's a timeline difference. In a way, it needed to be elevated, it needed to be speed up for the sake of really just getting assurance bedded down. So I'll close off with another, I'm not a very good football, I don't know that much about football, especially American football, but I will say, Gabriella, you're probably in Formula One, because motorsports is something I know more about. You've got the advantage of being in the slipstream of the IAASB, and often the person in the slipstream is the one that will win the race. So use that slipstream wisely. They've done the work for you.